Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Latino Vote Podcast. Thank you for putting up with Mike Madrid and Carlos Odio last week. At the viewers' demands, I am back in black, baby. I've been in Mexico, rested, tanned, ready to go. I've been hanging on to billfish and trying to protect my ass. What's going on, Mike Madrid?
I don't think we got one request to have you come back on this quickly, Chuck.
Whoa.
I missed you, though. That's the most important thing, is to remember. Carlos and I both missed you. Would love to have you on the show, but we knew that you were out there catching fish because you're posting pictures with you with like 800-pound marlin, fighting, getting bruised up. Who else gets bruised when they go fishing? But Chuck Rocha. Just Chuck.
I got a bruise as big as a softball on my belly, and I can explain why. Okay. Let me explain why, Mike. Let's do a little redneckology here.
Let's do it.
Anybody can go get on a giant boat with a giant rod and haul little baits behind your boat till some poor little marlin jumps on it and you tear up their mouth, you hurt the fish, reeling them in against the current. No. That's not what Chuck Rocha is still a Democrat. Chuck Rocha is still a liberal. I'm not going to be destroying fish while I'm doing this. Chuck Rocha took the Mexican-redneck conservation angle and went to Mexico to literally tag migratory marlin so I could track their well-being, make sure they're eating good, make sure they're getting their sleep and their rest. And wait, it gets better, Mike. I was in a little boat, so I didn't over-traumatize the fish, A. B, I was using a small little fly rod with a little bitty itsy fly, so if I barely hooked them, it didn't hurt them. And then I just brought them next to the boat. I put a little geotag in them. I petted them. I took their picture, and then I let them swim away to return to their family so they could be there in time for dinner. That's the way as Democrats.
If y'all are wondering why the Democrats lost in November, you perfect explanation as to why. I mean, good for you, I guess. But yeah, it's just not. Is that fishing at this point, or what is it? Is that fishing?
That's called conservation research that Chuck Rocha can write off with his LLC, Mike. That's what that is.
That sounds kind of to me. Yeah.
If you don't think that there was some fish killed and eaten, there was, but that was not the game fish. We were the regular little snappers and all the things that there's a bazillion of. We ate snapper, and we had Lagostino lobsters that we got from local fishermen. Like, we ate like kings down there down a dirt road in the middle of the Baja. It was really fantastic.
That sounds like a good trip. I should probably do something like that. Maybe we'll do a Latino Vote podcast trip with some followers down there and do a live podcast reporting from the pontoon boat or whatever you were out on with the Nerf fish hooks to not harm migratory fish or whatever.
It's just a hook and a feather that's tied to look like it's a fish when it swims. Anyway, I'll hat tip to my business partner, Luis, who we talked about on this podcast a couple months ago. He got his citizenship. He got to use his brand new USA passport to go with me back to Mexico. And Luis had a great time. He was like a kid in a candy store with a group of other folks. Another client I took down there was Township Council from Alamorada, Florida. I took Steve Friedman down there. He was slaying it with our buddy Mark Johnson, who's also a guide. But anyway, it was good to get there. Thank you for Mike and Carlos stepping in. Speaking of that, I said this before I came on air, and I want to throw it back to Mike, is I really enjoyed last week's episode, Mike. I thought what you and Carlos did was really good explaining to folks about what happened. I think we've laid the groundwork here where people now know the difference between exit polls and other polls and these other things that are coming out. And now they're talking about Associated Press, weighted this and that. Like, I get lost in some of that stuff too, but getting an understanding of how bad we got our ass whooped and why, and then it's not just Latino fault, but everybody else's. Was there anything that you took away from last week that you wanted to pontificate on this week as we bleed over?
No, just I'm a big fan of Carlos's. As you know, he's been on the show before, and he committed to coming on a little bit more regularly. He's really emerged as one of the premier Latino data analysts in the country. And we agree on probably, I'd say 85-90% of stuff. We disagree at 90%, but it's not, I don't disagree with his numbers, which is obviously really helpful. It's totally fine to disagree with people on the direction and the solution and the messaging. But when you can agree on the math, when you can agree on the actual data and the methodology, then you can find solutions. And I think that's what I really value about his friendship and his professionalism. And it's good to see him kind of emerging in this void to kind of start answering some of the questions about where Democrats go to kind of fill this void. And there will be some other guests too. I think as the Latino Vote podcast kind of broadens this, we should have a conversation about other Republicans too that had some success, just to kind of see what they're seeing. I'm never afraid to kind of hear what my opposition is thinking and the way they approach things. That's how you and I struck up a friendship. It's why you and I have, I think, such robust discussions. And I think as things change in the community, whether it's going to swing back in 2028, what year is this? My God, 2026. Midterms have started, folks, if you're not ready. I mean, we haven't completely counted yet everything in California. I'm hoping we will have all the complete vote counts in California by the time the midterms election start. And we'll take 2 years to count our votes again. But we're going to learn a lot more about the Latino vote too once California's count is done. A lot of big shifts in California. Some early data my partner was doing showed that in some districts, 11% rightward shift for Republicans broadly. A lot of that focused in some of the most Latino Assembly, Senate, and congressional districts in the state. So there's a lot of autopsy to be performed. But nothing else I want to add other than to say it's going to be great having Carlos as part of the Latino Vote podcast family, of which he was a member. We're just going to have him over for lunch and dinner a little bit more often and pick his brain a little bit more.
Oh, yeah, I thought it was really, really good. We're going to hit on a couple of topics today of things that I wanted to bring to the table to get your reaction on, Mike. First is a phenomenon that has been talked a lot about, and I'm not going to start talking about Latino men or Latino vote now. It's a phenomenon that is you had Senate races in battleground states that overlapped with the presidential battleground, where you had the Democratic senators or candidates win in those races, while you had Kamala Harris lose. Yep. And as we've dug into the numbers, what we're finding, and this is where I want you to jump in here, Mike, is I want you to react to the fact that in every one of those races, except Rubin, the Democratic senator or Senate candidate got less votes than Kamala Harris, but won the damn Senate race. Tell us how that happens.
So what you're saying is the Democrats got less votes, but overperformed the Republican in the race and obviously won, meaning Trump did better than Harris and the underlying Republican on the ticket. Is that right?
Yeah, it's that Harris got more votes than the Senate candidate, but the Senate candidate won and she lost.
Got it. So yeah, this is actually really, I think, one of the fascinating things. And I started to write about this in my book, and it's actually this outcome argues something different. What I argued in the Latino Century was that in many ways, Donald Trump was holding back a bigger rightward shift because in 2020, what we saw was the exact opposite, is Donald Trump was being outperformed by Republicans down ticket. And if you look at the midterms, that got even bigger. Ron DeSantis got 57% of the Latino vote. Donald Trump came nowhere near that in 2020. Greg Abbott in Texas, the governor of Texas, met or exceeded Donald Trump's Hispanic numbers in Texas. And you saw it with Doug Ducey in Arizona. You even saw it with a candidate named Brian Dahle in California. And most importantly, you saw it with every Republican in every swing district in the entire country. So that's strong evidence that Trump was not the Pied Piper bringing Latinos into the Republican fold. He was actually holding back a bigger shift. What happens this year is Trump actually overperforms a lot of these Republicans. Now, there's the anomaly like Kari Lake, right? Where, of course, Trump does better than Kari Lake does in Arizona. But from the data you're outlining, he actually was outperforming a lot of down-ticket Republicans. And in some congressional districts, it's the exact opposite, too. He was actually outperforming a lot of these Republicans down ticket. So what does that mean? Well, it means that in heavily Latino districts, it was easily explainable by saying the rightward shift would have been bigger without Trump. But what it also means is in non-Hispanic districts, this broad movement towards Trump explains that gap and that disparity. The only group that became more left, that moved more towards Kamala Harris, that became more Democratic, were college-educated white women. That's the only group. Every other group, Asian, Latinos, non-college educated white women, Hispanic women, black men, even black women didn't move more left. They stayed where they were at or diminished a little bit. So the Taylor Swift strategy didn't pan out nearly as well as I think a lot of Democratic operatives were suggesting it would. A lot of the reliance on cultural issues and Dobbs, I think, was a big mistake, easy to say in hindsight. I think we all thought, because of the previous election results, that it would be much, much bigger. It was not. The messaging that was leaning into that was not nearly as impactful, was not nearly as effective. And we may walk away from this whole thing, Chuck, at the end just saying people just didn't like the direction of the economy of the country. I know there's a lot of people saying this is all, everybody's becoming more racist, everybody's becoming more misogynist, everybody's becoming more of a hater. I'm not going to get into that. I think that there's probably some truth to that, but I'm not. What I am going to say is when you have that broad of a movement, what is basically every demographic except for one, you got to pay attention to it as something much bigger than kind of looking deeper and deeper into the data. It's like Occam's razor, which you should look that one up. Google that.
I don't know what you're talking about. But anyway, this is why we love Mike Madrid. Because I asked him a simple question that's got a simple answer. And he went on like a Georgetown College professor for 8 minutes. This is why we love him. So let me recap this for all you slow thinking people out there like me. I said that Harris loses Michigan, but gets more votes than Slotkin. But Slotkin wins the Senate race. And as a poor old, barely making it political consultant over here in little hayseed, Washington, D.C., what that means for all of you at home is there is a ton of people who went into the polling place and checked Donald Trump and then got the hell out of there. Now, you may not think it was that many, but it was enough to where you saw what happened with the same thing happened in Wisconsin. And the same thing happened almost in Arizona, except you had Ruben Gallego, we'll get to this, so overperformed that he got 3 points more than Harris and also won the race. So what was happening all across the top of the ticket is something me and Mike kind of talked about on this podcast leading up to the election, which was, will there be a down ballot effect for Donald Trump? And what was proven of one of two things is definitely a group of people went in and voted for Donald Trump and didn't give a shit about the rest of the ticket. I'm going to get to that on some other congressional races in California here in a minute, because we're going to go nerd out today. But there was also a little bit of third-party stuff there where there was some third-party people that got enough of some of that vote in some of the Senate races. But for those of you at home, that's one of the most fascinating things, which is that you have Slotkin in Michigan, who got less votes than the presidential candidate, but is the U.S. senator there. The same thing in Wisconsin, but right now, the Senate candidate has just a few thousand votes more than her. So it's this amazing underperformance down ballot. And as we continue to look down ballot, and I'm going to just move on to the next topic, and Mike can push the two together, is that you have the House of Representatives, even though you have this dramatic shift, one of which is one of the biggest places, the three states that had the biggest shift towards Republicans were New York, New Jersey, Florida, and California. There's a few others. You can look on Twitter and get this list. But in New York, even with this dramatic overperformance for Trump, you have 2 congressional seats that swing from Republican to Democrat. Democratic pickups in the New York congressional race. Now, these are races that Biden won by 7 or 8 points, and then you have these congressional candidates squeaking out a few point leads. You had other Democrats there protecting their seat, like I think his name is Pat Ryan. So it's really interesting what happened down ballot, and you had people not really voting down ballot. And then, Mike, the last thing I'll say, I'm conglomerating. I'm putting all this together to say in California, a state that way overperformed for Donald Trump again, you have Democrats picking up seats in places where there's lots of suburbanites. Mike will love this because I'm throwing him this softball, which is in California 27 where they flip a seat, in California 45 where they flip a seat where Michelle Steele is, and we keep an open seat in Orange County where the congresswoman with the white chalkboard ran, and we should have lost that seat, but a Democrat named David Min won that seat. So you have all these contradicting things. And I'll say this and finally wrap this up. There's 2 congressional seats that were in rural America in California that it doesn't look like will flip, which is California 22 and California 13. Lots of working class Latinos, and we're not going to flip those. So we flipped the 3 seats in California that have pretty large Latino populations that are more suburban, more in the cities, Orange County, and then where Mike grew up in northern LA County. So Mike kind of cobbled all that stuff together. You got the New York races that flipped, even though New York overperforms for Trump. Republicans, overperforming California. We flipped 3 seats there, but don't flip the 2 in the most rural areas. And I think this all kind of goes into the dynamics that nobody's talking about. This was really a unique electorate.
Or somebody wrote a book on that predicting it.
Here we go.
Which y'all ought to be buying right now on Amazon, and they can get for a couple bucks off, because everybody's suddenly an expert on this. But it was Mike Madrid writing a book on it, and everyone's saying, "Oh, he's that crazy right-wing Republican. Don't pay attention to him." And then within 48 hours of the election, it was suddenly a Latino rightward shift expert. But that's okay. That's the price of being able to see the future. But look, I think California is going to be very indicative of what we're going to be talking about on this show going forward, and we're going to be talking about as a country going forward, Chuck, which is, who are these Latino voters, and is there such thing as a Latino vote, and is it more of a class distinction than we have come to recognize? Because you're exactly right. These rural, poorer, less educated Latino voters seem to be breaking more Republican, right? And what you're seeing is the Democrats winning in more suburbanized areas with multi-generational Latinos with higher income levels and higher college graduate levels that are becoming more democratic. And that's exactly what California seems to be playing out at this point in time. Now, still votes to count, not a whole lot more, but enough to be consequential in some of these races. But you're exactly right. Northern Los Angeles County, very suburban. Latino Republican Mike Garcia is going to lose, has already lost. Good chance that Michelle Steele, the Republican in what is a mixed working class suburban district, Republican there, loses. Incidentally, and again, this is a little bit in the weeds too, but the Vietnamese voting bloc in Orange County, which is very Republican, broke pretty strongly Democratic because the Democratic nominee was a Vietnamese running against a Korean.
Mike, let me interrupt. Is this, his name was Derek Tran, and Tran is Vietnamese?
Tran is Vietnamese.
Cool.
And Michelle Steele is Korean.
Right. I didn't know that.
And there's very vibrant, big diasporas of both in that district. And where we saw the Westminster part of that district, which is very Vietnamese, has historically been overwhelmingly Republican. That moved considerably, measurably, enough to make a difference in this race, more than enough to make a difference in this race. It broke towards the Democrat. The reason why that's important is it's yet more evidence that tying partisanship to ethnicity doesn't work anymore. Okay? The idea of having a Democrat candidate who's Vietnamese compared to a Republican Korean and asking Vietnamese Republicans to vote, those Vietnamese were voting for the Vietnamese person more than the party person, even though Republican partisanship is so...
That wouldn't make people, though, be more... wouldn't it go against what you're saying, or I might not be following you, that if you're saying Tran is Vietnamese and most of those are Republican, they voted for him because he was Vietnamese, which says to me that's because of his identity of race.
What I'm saying is we can't say that partisanship identity are melded anymore.
Okay.
Because if you look at the city next door, Santa Ana, Santa Ana is one of the largest Latino cities in California. They voted down by 60-40 a measure. This is literally the town next door. Overwhelmingly Latino, one of the biggest cities in California, it's like 80% Latino, voted down an advisory measure to allow the undocumented to vote. That means Latino voters voted down a measure 60-40. They crushed it by and because this rightward shift is happening in a lot of these Latino precincts too, is there's a separation between partisan identity and ethnic and racial identity. And it's not just a Latino dynamic. It's happening with Vietnamese. It's happening with Asians. It's happening with Black voters. It's happening with Latino voters. It's happening broadly. And that was kind of my point. Maybe I said it very inartfully.
No, you were right. I wasn't following you. You were right.
But that's what I'm saying is we can no longer assume that your ethnic or racial background cements in your partisan attitudes.
And I think that goes to the point of when I'm telling folks that it matters, and lawyers wouldn't let me run an ad in California 22 that says, David Valadeo is Portuguese. His people own farms, and our people work on those farms. You should be with the Mexican, because if they think that, enough of them think that he's that way, and probably some of them align with his values. I don't want to make it too simplistic, but I think that's another thing. Give me the contrast between what I just said about this rural district and the district where you grew up in California 27, where George Whiteside kind of pulls this, I would say, as a surprise to many people, beats Mike Garcia. Now, in full disclosure, now that it's over, I can tell you that I spent millions of dollars on LA media and LA digital and ran a full-born campaign to suburban women, lots of Latinos that are upper middle class, around abortion, around Social Security, kind of the standard cookie cutter stuff, and spent a lot of money, but didn't really go after Garcia. I ran an ad that said he had turned his back on us around some policy stuff. Because again, y'all at home, this is a more educated district. This is LA. This is not California 13 or 22. It's the exact opposite. And I'll stop there and say, Mike, is that the difference here?
That's exactly the difference. Right. And so, in most of this Mike Garcia district, Mike Garcia was a Republican in a very suburban congressional district. This is where you don't see a lot of what we call Hispanic density. There's a lot of Latinos, but they're interspersed, intermarried in the same neighborhoods as a lot of whites, a lot of Asians, not a lot of black voters in that district, but a lot of whites, a lot of Asians. You don't have, it's not like East Los Angeles or Fresno, where you have very large precincts with overwhelmingly Latino communities. These voters are voting more based off of their education and income levels than they are their race and ethnicity. Many of them are multi-generational or third, fourth generation, and they're voting more on cultural issues, which is why they're breaking more towards the Democrat. Same goes for Fresno, Bakersfield, Stockton. These non-college educated, more recently migrated Latino voters are shifting more to the right. But again, I would argue that same reason. It's this diploma divide. It's this class divide. It's a cultural divide. And so they're becoming more Republican in the Central Valley. They're becoming more Republican in the Rio Grande Valley. They're becoming more conservative in the New Mexico, too, on the southern of the border. They're becoming more Republican on the Arizona border and in Imperial County along the border in Southern California. We had a huge upset in a Democrat plus 15, plus 18 district where a Republican comes out of nowhere, spends no money, got no institutional support from the Republicans statewide, and wins the race.
Where?
Down in Imperial County, down by the border. One of the poorest, biggest Latino counties in the state.
California?
California.
Oh, okay. That's where I was lost.
And there should be some big dissecting of that race, too, because this is where those economic problems are the most acute. And it's really hard for me to kind of take a lot of these Democrats seriously, especially white and black progressives. Yes, I said it, who are saying this is racism and misogyny. When this comes down to an overwhelmingly Latino, legislative district, plus 15, plus 18 Democrat, unless suddenly something in the water, turned everybody. This district has been a Democratic district forever. It's been a Latino district literally forever, since statehood. I mean, these are very long-term, multi-generational, and recently migrated Latinos. It's just Latino all the way you look at it. This district flipped. And it flipped because of this shift away from the Democratic Party. And as one of my good friends here, big Democratic consultant in the state, as we were assessing this, he put it perfectly. He said, look, it's not that Democrats have a Latino problem. It's that Latino have a Democrats problem. And they're moving away from the Democratic Party as much, or I would even argue more, than they're moving towards the Republican Party. It manifests itself the same way on Election Day. But until the Democrats recognize they've got a working class problem and address it that way and not a racial problem, they're never going to fix this. They're going to never go fix it.
Wait just a damn minute. You've got other big time Democratic consultant friends. Let's get some shit straight here.
People like Mike Madrid. I mean, I know
that is bullshit. I
like
like Mike Madrid, and people can't figure out why. I don't think you got. I don't know. Anyway, my feelings a little hurt. You told me I was the only one. Now I realize I'm just a basket of deplorables over here with your other Democratic friends. Let me make an opposite point.
Yeah,
which is, you talked about how the Republicans, blah blah blah, on the border, and you're probably right. It breaks my heart to talk about it. That's why I give it the blah blah blah. Let's talk about where we did do good, and we showed that we do get this, and that Democrats are smarter than Republicans.
Yeah.
Which is, Ruben Gallego
Yeah.
and Gabe Vasquez. Now, Gabe Vasquez is that Democratic congressional candidate on the border of New Mexico who represents the entire New Mexico border. Now, Gabe Vasquez is in a district that is literally a 50-50 district. Registration is 50-50. It's a 50-50 race, and he's running against a woman who had held the seat before and who ran last time before, and he beat her. And Gabe Vasquez has a hunting hat. He's got a pickup truck. He was in conservation like I am. He's got a hunting dog. He gets out there and talks about choice, but he also gets there and talks about hunting and fishing and being with all the tribes and doing all the things. He shows up and he's on the border talking about, having a pathway to citizenship, but also securing the border and doing the things. Him and Ruben were the shining lights to me in this campaign. Sure, I'm very preferential, if I'm saying that right, to Ruben. And yes, I was with Ruben from day one. And a million people now have written the story of Ruben Gallego has showed Democrats the pathway back with men and how to run a campaign. And yes, I get to get a lot of that, bask in that glory, but it's true. But it's not because of Chuck Rocha, and Chuck Rocha, who everybody thinks some kind of political whore here, and I'm saying it here. It's not about me. Sure, I was there to make sure it happened, but Ruben Gallego drove this strategy. And Ruben Gallego pushed back against a lot of his own consultants, party leaders, and people in Washington, D.C. in meetings that I was in representing Ruben to do what he wanted to do with Latinos and Latino men for a long period of time. Was it a Chuck Rocha grand strategy? No, it wasn't. It was a Ruben Gallego-driven strategy. Ruben Gallego is the reason Ruben Gallego won, because he demanded that we do the things that we did. I was there to make sure that they got implemented and have his back when he wasn't there. But that's what makes it very different. In many of these races around the country, your candidates are bullied out of doing what they may think is common sense and the right thing because some DC or New York consultant says, oh, we can't take beer to that thing. Oh, we can't go to this boxing match. For God's sakes, Chuck Rocha, what do you mean we've secured 10 livestock bulls? We ain't got nowhere to put no bulls, and we don't even know what a bull does. So that's the point I'm making, is Ruben put his neck out there for a long period of time and drove that strategy himself to say, I'm going to lean into being a man. I'm also going to lean into choice. I'm also going to lean into border security. I'm also going to go everywhere and talk to Republicans and independents and to men going to work and folks in auto garages, the same thing that Gabe Vasquez did. That's how Gabe and Ruben won. And that's why Ruben should be lifted up in the strategy that he had. But it wasn't because of some consultant that he had. It's because Ruben demanded that from day one. And that's the biggest difference here, because in meeting after meeting that I'm in with candidates will always defer to a pollster or to some media consultant who thinks that they've got a better idea than the candidate because they've run all these races and all these places, where Ruben's gut was always right. And that's why Ruben overperformed in a state that was plus 11 on performance for Republicans. And you heard it here first. Mike, what do you think about my two examples out of Arizona and New Mexico?
I think you're so hopped up, you're sounding like Mike Madrid. That's just
no, don't put me there.
It's like you got fires coming out of his ears. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, I hope you are. There's like smoke coming out of his ears. He's pretty hopped up about this. The big question I have out of all of that is it do you deal with the bulls at the rodeo the way you deal with the migrating fish? Was he using like Nerf hand gloves to make sure he didn't hurt the bulls during the rodeo too?
It's funny. You've seen those floaties those tubes that are made out of the stuff that are Nerf. And you've seen kids use them bananas in the pool. They put them on bulls' horns now.
Of course they do. That's how you know it's a Democratic rodeo.
That's right, because we put the cushions on the bulls' horns.
Yeah, and instead of a cowboy hat, they wear a crash helmet with a big visor.
Sometimes with a big thing on them. But Mexicans rodeo much different than white people. There's
they do.
Mexicans who don't even hang on to ride the bulls.
Yeah. So look, I mean, there's no way you can look at it any other way than to say that probably the biggest shining star coming out of the election for Democrats in 2024 was Ruben Gallego and Gabe Vasquez too. You got to give credits to the fact that a lot of these Latino men were not, and by the way, this was not new to them. Okay, these politicians, Ruben Gallego specifically, has been saying this for years. This is not this wasn't a battlefield conversion for this guy who saw some polling and started to make a pivot. He has been driving this charge for a long time. And what I think is going to be fascinating is to see how this new leadership in the Democratic Party emerges. And as I was saying before the election, the future of the Democratic Party is not with the white working class in the Rust Belt. That's clear. The future of the Democratic Party is the Latino working class in the Sun Belt. And write that down, boys and girls, because that's going to tell you everything about what the 270 map is going to look like in 2028. The old blue wall is becoming now I hate to use a different metaphors there about the wall, the part of the country.
I'm anti-wall. Go ahead.
Yeah, but that is going to look very, very different now. The Sun Belt is going to be the roadmap for both parties, and it's going to go through Nevada. It's going to go through Arizona. It's going to stretch out through Georgia and North Carolina in ways that are going to redefine what the old blue wall was, because that white working class is just not going to be a base of support for the Democratic Party. And if the Democratic Party is going to be a national party, it's going to have to claw back, scratch back, regain some of that foothold with the Latino working class. It's a much better opportunity than it is the white working class, which has been leaving for the better part of 20 years now. And that 270 map is going to look very, very, very different than the one that we have been relying on.
The good news is we're going to have a lot of time to talk about this as you and Carlos talked about. As the numbers come in on the voter file, and for all of you at home, we're going to get the voter file back in the coming months, probably in January, February, March. Well, that stuff will trickle in. Each state is responsible for getting their own votes in. For God's sakes, they're still not through counting votes in many places, in California. Then we could get them in to see what the performance was like. And then me and Mike Madrid will spend all of next year going through every one of these numbers to see were we right, were we wrong. There's things that are indicative. I think I used that right. Things that we know that happened that are, we got our ass beat. I've been on TV nonstop, except when I went to Mexico talking, and I've run and lost and won a lot of elections. And so when you get your ass whooped, you figure out what you did wrong and you did right. And then, the last topic I want to talk on, because by the time this goes live this week, my name will have been out there circulated, came out in a press release today, not a press release, but in a news article about what's going to happen with the DNC. That's the next big election for Democrats. Or we going to pick as our leader of the party. And I've been getting calls from lots of friends within the DNC, lots of friends within labor, friends within lots of other places, and asking me if it's something I would think about doing, because we all feel like that people feel the same way I do, which is we need to return this party back to a party of workers that I joined 35 years ago, and make this the party of workers, and them the party of the elites and the bosses and all the things. And I don't know if I'm going to run for party chair. Sure, I'm thinking about it. And if there's somebody better at some point, I may back them. But right now, I am thinking about it, because we don't even know what the rules are yet. They're going to put out the rules this week. I spoke to my friends inside the DNC. They're going to release the rules. And why shouldn't I think about doing it? Because there's probably not been a non-college educated brown man who actually runs campaigns and knows what we need to do to rebuild the party, who's been a precinct chair, who's worked for state parties. And there'll probably be a lot of great people running. And this is not me saying Chuck Rocha is better than anybody else. I just think that all of us at some point in our lives take a backseat to somebody else because we think that they're more qualified or better, when we undersell ourselves, because we are just as important as anybody else. And until that point comes, I'm going to keep my name in consideration, and maybe I'll do it, maybe I won't. It all depends who's going to run. It's too early, but I wanted you, our faithful listeners, to know it is something I'm seriously considering, because I do think the pathway back is what me and Mike's been talking about here, is we have to realign the party around the values of work, and the values of work will reach across all the different beautiful shades of the palette of the Democratic Party and America, for that matter. If we start rooting ourselves in the differences between what these parties are going to start doing in Congress and in the House, there's a real way to be able to distinguish ourselves. And the one thing that we can't get sucked into, Democrats, is we can't look for a short-term solution, even if it's Chuck Rocha, to a long-term problem. It's going to take us a while to dig out of this hole, but we've got to stay steady. And if we stay true to the values of who we are, as representing workers and being right on policy for workers and families, then I think that there's a pathway back against a Donald Trump, who I think is a false, I don't know the word, Mike, false icon about working people. I think he talks a lot of shit, but he don't believe none of it. He wouldn't know hard work if somebody melted it and poured it on him. He wouldn't know hard work. So until then, I'm going to leave my name in the mix. And Mike, I ain't asking you for some endorsement, because it probably hurt me. I'm just saying, I'm letting you know up front that I probably might do this.
Well, I actually saw your name in an ABC story, so the word has gotten out. And you don't want my endorsement. I mean, that's like radioactive. That doesn't help you anywhere. But what I will say is, as a Latino, I'm just glad that the party is going to have this discussion. I can't think of somebody who's better to kind of be a part of that discussion and driving that discussion than a Latino male, blue collar, working class political operative. Like that's exactly what the party needs. And I'm sure the party will listen. At least I hope they'll listen to you. But I think that's exciting. I think that's big news. We know how big and wide the bullhorn is here on the Latino Vote podcast. So you're hearing it first. This is the first conversation you and I have had about it.
Sure. Tens of listeners.
Yeah, we need to have a little sideball about it too. I'd love to interview you further and talk about what that looks like and talk about what the agenda would look like, because this is, regardless of who the next party chairman is, this is the central issue for the Democratic Party for the next generation. If the Democratic Party cannot develop and articulate a multi-ethnic working class agenda, it will cease to be a relevant national political force. It will become increasingly marginalized in places where there are just wealthy white progressives. And that's not good for the country. It's not good for the party. It's not good for the future. And I'm glad that you're the one who's finding yourself being called to this moment, Chuck. And I'm glad that you're at least entertaining the idea.
Look, I pick on you, you pick on me. I'm really happy what we've built here at the podcast. It'll be separate if I decide to do this or not. But to our listeners, you deserve to know that it's something that we're thinking about. And we'll continue to talk about that and lots of other things on the political sphere. Here live from Washington, D.C. in the armpit of California, out there in Sacramento, and all the places that we come to you live from. Don't forget to listen and like us and follow us and get out there and tweet at us. If you like me, say that. If you don't like me, talk about it. My name is Mike Madrid, and until next week, we'll see you then.